Welcome back to Invest Africa. After decades of substantial but sometimes difficult progress, Ghana recognizes that it still faces important challenges in its developmental trajectory. The World Bank, among other institutions, aims to assist Ghana in order to sustain economic growth, reach the Millennium Development Goals, and move forward in its efforts to attain middle income status.
Ghana's commercial oil production is expected to transform the economy and attract an influx of strong foreign direct investment in the future. This has put the country in the fiscal space to start looking at non-concessional sources of financing, and has also prompted African institutions to reaffirm their role in contributing to Africa's growth story.
I think what Africa needs at the moment, most African countries do not have the long-term domestic savings that would provide long-term, low-interest funding for infrastructure. Right. And that's where I think the ADB should focus on. How do you provide transportation infrastructure? How do you provide irrigation? How do you provide power?
August 2011 saw the Ghanaian Parliament approve a $3 billion loan from the China Development Bank. This marked the largest facility ever secured by Ghana and will be used to finance the infrastructure gap identified in the National Development Strategy. But Ghana's pre-election macroeconomic challenges have raised concerns around the country's growth path.
Traditionally, Ghana's track record during election years in terms of macroeconomic management has not been very good. Typically, we see three key themes coming to the fore in election years, and those are fiscal slippage, where the government typically tends to miss its targets. With the increase in spending, inflation edging up towards double-digit levels again, came in at 9.4, the June number. And we also see persistent currency weakness. The currency is depreciated just under 20% for over the course of 2012. And
the widening of the fiscal deficit may add to investor uncertainty and place further pressure on the already weakening currency. Decisive leadership, unwavering economic and political reforms, and investor confidence are key to unlocking Ghana's economic development. Dumisha Makhanyele, Johannesburg.
Still with me in studio, Talabo Ngalo, Portfolio Manager, Stanlib Africa Equity Fund, Grant Hatch, Executive Director, Strategy Practice, Accenture Southern Africa, and joining us for the second half of the show, Alex Darko, MD of Cardo Consulting. Thank you so much for your time again. Well, the equity markets, we haven't spoken about the equity markets in Ghana. I assume that the trend is again an illiquid one with very few companies listed. Is that the reality?
Yeah, you know, and unfortunately, like Ghana, like most countries in Africa, you know, the GDP of, if you look at the country's economy in terms of GDP, is still not representative of what's on the listed market. So, I mean, as a typical example, if you look at the Ghanaian telco space, you know, you've got MTN, you've got Tigo, you've got Airtel, in terms of the major sort of cell phone companies, but none of them are listed. So the stock market is not really representative of what's happening in the economy. Luckily, at the moment, you've got a dual listing of Tyler Oil. So unfortunately, you know, the growth that we're seeing in the economy is not really feeding into the market. And I think the biggest issue we have in Ghana is the liquidity on the market. So the stock market is unfortunately not very liquid. It's still very tiny, and we still suffer from a situation where a lot of the big companies like the Unilevers, Fenmilk, are still held by the offshore parent companies, and most of these companies hold in excess of 70% in some instances. So liquidity is still a bit of an issue, and I think the market is still not where it should be. And I think with a bit more development, I think we could catch up a bit over time. Yeah.
Alex, you were listening to the conversation in the first half with regard to infrastructure, and you wanted to add your thoughts.
Look, I think as my colleague said, infrastructure is a challenge, but the government has started making inroads into that. I mean, for instance, recently I think, especially the rail system, because when you talked about agro-business, it needs the rail network to carry it. And recently, I think General Electric, has actually invested or intend to invest over $1 billion to revive the Maribon railway system. And there's this whole lot of other infrastructure projects that have to be in place to help the economy. So the road network is usually where in the past the emphasis have been, but in telecommunication, but particularly the rail network, if it's revived in the right way, would be an important addition to to support the economic activities.
Is it going to be revived in the right way, the rail network?
I think it's been a long time, there's been a long conversation around the best way to do it. And I think obviously GE took its time to decide on whether and in what way to engage, because obviously they're looking for a commercial return. So if they can put the pipeline or the railway network in the places that carry the most traffic. Because for instance, you find Burkina Faso is landlocked, and a lot of its imports and exports go through the ports in Ghana. So the railway network, in addition to supporting what goes on in the country, would also be a trans-Africa type rail network. And I think that would be a useful way to earn revenue and justify the investment.
Grant, let's speak about Ghana in the context of West Africa and how important the country is to that region.
But I think it starts with the question Taba raised about liquidity. I think that a lot of companies make the decision to list on a regional stock exchange, and Lagos is often more attractive. So I think the challenge for Ghana is how does it position itself with its larger and sort of more dominant economic neighbor, and to try and to the point about Alex raised about getting the rail networks integrated, getting the cross-border trading working. I mean, borders are still very difficult to move products through ports. I mean, there's still long delays in the sort of upper port. So, to the extent to which Ghana can work with the Nigerian side and actually create a sort of more regional focus around things like agriculture, around manufacturing to move those products. I mean, that's really going to be the key to unlocking the whole region, rather than Ghana develop on its own and Nigeria developing separately. In fact, Ghana has more to gain by integration with Nigeria because it's a much larger market. I mean, you've got 150 million people versus around 25. So it makes a lot more sense for Ghana to do that.
This is a big theme we've been discussing of late. Is that integration happening specifically between Nigeria and Ghana?
Look, I think the framework that has to help liberalize that is the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of African countries. There are some structures in place, but in terms of making track into the specifics, I think that the bases are there. It's a lot of liberalization in the banking sector. A lot of Nigerian banks have, for instance, opened up business in Ghana, and that I think, and the oil flow as a source, before the Ghana found its own oil, Nigeria has been a major source of, so there's a political engagement, and that then supported by the commercials, I think that's going to be the way to go. But it's something that has to be pursued and pushed.
When you're looking to invest in companies in Ghana, what are the highlights and what sectors are your focus?
If you look at the market in Ghana, obviously the banking sector, at the moment you've got 8 banks listed on the stock exchange. So the stock exchange at the moment has 34 companies, 8 of them are banks. So if you look across, the banks are quite important. You look at obviously some of the indigenous banks, like banks such as UT Financial Services, which now has a bank in the arm called UT Bank. You look at Standard Chartered Bank. So I think those are some of the names we'd be looking at. We're also quite interested in the consumer names. Guinness is quite interesting on the market in Ghana. Unilever is quite interesting. I mean, there's also plays.
So the branded goods environment is a big theme.
It's a big theme. I think it also this plays into the whole theme. I guess everyone sees and talks about. The African consumer is rising. You look at companies like Fen Milk, which produces ice cream and milk and what have you. And these are fantastic businesses that are well run. That are just huge opportunities for investors such as ourselves.
And Grant, when it comes to advising, consulting in Ghana, what areas are the hotspots?
Well, I think it's as Taba said, a lot of the multinationals are looking at entering Africa, so they look at East and West Africa, and if it's West Africa, the decision around do they go to Ghana or Nigeria and center their operations there. And it tends to vary. I mean, what we've seen is a lot of the German companies tending to favor the sort of Ghana because of the living standards in Accra are seen as better than in Lagos. A lot of the multinationals, that look at P&G, Unilever, have started really focused on Nigeria because it's a much larger consumer market. So it does vary, but across companies. But I think all of them have in mind the view to actually how do they serve both markets? Do they build operations in one country and then SOG the other? But they do tend to view it as a regional focus because that's where the combined market is much larger.
A theme we're starting to roll out on Invest Africa is asking the experts what business they would start in country. And that gives us a very good indication of where you would put your money. So Alex, that's the question to you. Okay. $100,000, where would you put it in Ghana? Or what would you start?
I think one of the businesses that has already started, but I think I would look to get into, is the whole outsource market. You know, I know education is still an issue, but historically, education was made free and compulsory at point of independence. So there's a high educational culture in the country. And also there's a whole lot of returning experts who had gone in the past because of the political environment or the economic environment are returning. And there's a high interest. There's a couple of years ago, the BBC did a survey and found the number of internet cafes in Accra alone was literally in the hundreds. And there's a whole lot of interest in IT business. So I think the language is English, people speak English. There's high literacy in IT. And therefore, if you have a business, and also the time zone for most of the places, either in the US or other places, so the outsourced support type environment where people are looking for high-end support staff to support their products and services, I think that would be a business that I would invest in.
You know the question. What's the answer?
Yeah, I agree with Alex on the IT part. I think there's going to be a focus on developing shared services and business processing around hubs, and Accra could compete very effectively for that, as Nigeria would. The other area I'd invest in, but I'm going to need a lot more than $100,000. I have to speak to Stanley, is investing in the agriculture sector, the sort of value processing part, linking the primary.
We're up it now to $1 million, $2 million. We're happy with that.
Into agri-processing. I think there's huge opportunities linking that into the back end of the consumer goods supply chains around primary conversion.
Thabo?
I think, you know, I think if everyone else is asking for a bit more, I think can I get 10 million or 100 million even?
We're going to get it from Stan Lim.
But I think for us, I mean, in addition to the, you know, the sectors mentioned, I think the consumer sector is one I'd be keen on, and primarily because it's a defensive sector. You know, I think from our investment philosophy, we focus on companies that have very solid earnings profile and that are defensive and perhaps that can generate quite a lot of cash. So if you look at the consumer space, you know, companies that produce milk, you know, the daily staples, you know, whether there's a recession or not, people still need toothpaste, still need milk, still need, you know, juice and what have you. So I think those are some of the companies we'd look at, and some of the companies I'd be quite keen, you know, to put a bit of money in, A
bit of money. You're asking for $10 million. That's all we have time for on this edition of Invest Africa. We'll be back again at the same time. Until next week, from me, Bronwyn Nielsen, and my guests, it's goodbye.